In the village of Tshilapfene, a body floats in the river and the whole village holds its breath. She was the most beautiful girl anyone had ever seen. But nobody is asking how she died. They are asking why. Two sisters, one gift from the forest, one secret too dangerous to keep. What happens when kindness is rewarded and beauty becomes a weapon? What happens when the wrong sister wins? This is not just a story about jealousy. This is a story about what jealousy does to a soul, how it eats, how it hunts, how it kills. Watch until the end, because the truth will shake you. The body was found at dawn. It was Sonto who saw it first, a young girl going to the river to rinse her washing pail before the sun climbed too high. She screamed so loudly that the birds in the baobab trees scattered all at once into the pale sky, and the sound carried through the red soil paths of Tshilapfene like a stone thrown into still water. By the time the elders arrived, nearly 30 villagers had gathered at the bank of the Mutale River, standing in a half circle around the shape that lay face down in the shallow edge of the current, one arm stretched forward as though reaching for something just out of reach. It was a woman, and she was beautiful even in death. Her wrapper was soaked dark, her long neck angled at the water's edge, her skin catching the first orange light of morning like polished amber. Nobody moved to touch her. Nobody spoke. They simply stood there, holding the heavy silence of a thing that could not yet be understood. Then an old man near the back said softly, "That is Zinhle," and the silence cracked. 3 days earlier, Zinhle had been the most talked about woman in all of Tshilapfene. Her name was on every tongue, her face in every conversation. But it had not always been that way. For most of her life, Zinhle was the sister nobody looked at twice. Not because she was unkind, not because she was difficult or proud or strange, but simply because her older sister Naledi stood too close to her and drew all the light in any room they entered together. Naledi was the kind of beauty that made people forget what they were saying mid-sentence. She had high cheekbones shaped like they had been carved with patience, dark eyes that caught the light like still water at noon, and a way of moving through a space that made every eye follow her without meaning to. The women of Tshilapfene had long ago accepted that Naledi's beauty was a separate thing, almost a living creature that walked beside her, demanding attention, demanding tribute. Men from neighboring villages came on market days, not only for the goods, but to catch a glimpse of her. The chief's son had once sent his mother to make quiet inquiries. Even Gogomakadzi, the strange old woman said to live deep in the forest past the third hill, was rumored to have once said that Naledi was born on a lucky morning. Zinhle knew all of this because she had lived inside it her entire life. She was not ugly, but she was plain in the way that plain becomes invisible when it stands next to extraordinary. Her features were soft and forgettable, her skin uneven, her hair difficult to manage in the dry season. She worked harder than anyone in her household, waking before the roosters, sweeping the compound, hauling water, while Naledi sat combing her hair on the front step and receiving compliments from passing neighbors. And still, every single day, Naledi found a way to remind her.
"Zinhle, do not stand next to me in the market today," Naledi said one morning, not even looking up from the mirror shard she used to examine her own reflection. "You make people feel sorry for me, standing next to someone who looks like that." Zinhle pressed her lips together and said nothing. "If beauty were food," Naledi said another time, laughing lightly as she said it, as though it were a simple observation and not a blade, "you would starve forever." The women who had that laughed too, not because it was kind, because Naledi was beautiful, and beautiful people are too often forgiven for their cruelty. Zinhle smiled the way she always smiled, small and private, a smile that lived only in her eyes for a moment and then died, and carried a water pail inside. She cried at night. Not every night, but enough nights that she knew the particular weight of crying quietly so that no one hears you. She cried into the darkness of the room she shared with her sister, listening to Naledi breathe deeply and peacefully on the other side of the mat. And she prayed to whoever was listening that one day, just one day, someone would look at her and see something worth seeing. It was on a Tuesday, near the end of the dry season, when Zinhle walked the long path through the forest to fetch water from the spring that the village women used when the main river ran low. She had been sent because Naledi refused to go, said the walk was too long and would tire her legs before the dance gathering that weekend. Zinhle did not argue. She took the clay pot, balanced it against her hip, and started down the dusty path alone. The forest past the second hill was different from the rest of the land around Tshilapfene. The trees grew denser there, their roots breaking up through the red earth, their branches tangled overhead in a way that turned afternoon light into something amber and soft. It was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not empty, but listening. She almost walked past the old woman entirely. The woman was sitting on a low stone just off the path, her back bent with age, a bundle of dry firewood beside her that was clearly too heavy for her thin arms to carry alone. She wore a faded blue cloth wrapped twice around her shoulders, and her hair, what remained of it, was white as ash. She had the kind of face that held so many years in it that it had passed through old into something beyond old, something ancient and somehow still, like the face of a baobab tree. She looked up at Zinhle. "I have been resting here a long time, my child," the old woman said. "These old legs cannot do what they once did. Will you help me carry this wood? My home is not far." Zinhle was tired. Her pot was not yet filled, and the path was long, and the sun was already tipping toward afternoon. But she looked at the woman's thin wrists and the size of the bundle and put her pot down without any further thought. "Mama, let me carry it," she said. They walked together through the denser part of the forest, the old woman moving slowly and with care, asking Zinhle questions along the way, not about big things, but small ones. What did she cook when the rains were good? Did she prefer the mornings or the evenings? What was the last thing that made her laugh? And Zinhle answered all of it honestly, surprised by how easy it was to talk to someone who simply listened. By the time they reached the old woman's dwelling, a small, round structure almost hidden by wild fig trees, Zinhle had said more words out loud in those 20 minutes than she normally spoke in a full week at home.
The old woman took her firewood and then turned back to Zinhle with something in her hand. A small calabash, barely the size of a fist, sealed with a twist of dried leaf. Inside it, through the god's pale wall, a faint light pulsed, not bright, but warm, the way an ember pulses under ash. "Take this," the old woman said. "Drink it before the moon sleeps tonight, all of it." Zinhle looked at it uncertain. "What is it?" "Something I have been keeping for someone who deserved it," the old woman said. Her eyes were steady and clear, the kind of eyes that have stopped pretending about things. "The world has not seen you yet, child. Tonight it will." Zinhle walked home with the calabash pressed against her side, her empty pot still waiting at the spring. She had forgotten all about it. She told herself she would not drink it. She told herself it was probably nothing. Roots and water, the kind of village remedy old women gave out for 100 different ailments. She set it on the floor beside her sleeping mat and lay down and stared at the ceiling. The moon moved slowly across the gap in the thatched roof. Before it disappeared, she drank. The taste was not sweet and not bitter. It was like drinking cool air, like breathing in a forest after rain. It filled her chest and then her throat, and then spread through her limbs all at once, a warmth that was not heat, but something else, something close to recognition. She fell asleep so quickly she barely felt it happen. she woke up to Nalevi screaming. Not a scream of fear, a scream of a completely different kind. The kind that comes when the world rearranges itself around you and leaves you standing in the wrong place. Zinhle sat up and looked at her hands first. They were the same hands, but the skin on them, it glowed. Not like she was on fire, like she was lit from somewhere deep and steady, like a lamp whose oil would never run out. She touched her face. She felt the same, but the touch felt different. She went outside. The first person who saw her was old Mama Dube, who was walking past carrying a basket of sweet potatoes. The old woman stopped. Her mouth opened. She set her basket down on the ground, stared at Zinhle for a long moment, and then whispered something under her breath in the old language that Zinhle could not catch. Then she hurried away. Zinhle stood there, confused, until Sonto from 3 houses down came running toward her with wide eyes. "Zinhle," Sonto breathed, "what happened to you?" By noon, the whole village knew. She was breathtaking. There was no other word for it. The softness of her face had not changed. It had deepened, like something that had always been there had finally been allowed to show. Her skin had an evenness to it now, a luminosity that made people keep looking even after they had looked. Her eyes, which had always been kind, were now also striking, dark and full and steady in a way that drew people in and made them feel held. The chief's son, who had been quietly courting Naledi for 2 seasons, rode past her near the market and pulled the reins so hard the animal snorted in protest. He looked at Zinhle for a long moment without speaking. Then he climbed down from the horse. Naledi was watching from across the market. She stood perfectly still, the way a person stands when they are trying not to show that something inside them has just collapsed. She watched the chief's son walk toward her sister. She watched the crowd of villagers who had gathered not around her today, but around Zinhle.
She watched the woman she had mocked for plain skin and forgettable features receive the kind of attention Naledi had built her entire identity upon. She watched the world rearrange itself and leave her standing in the wrong place. And she felt something move through her chest that was so sharp and so cold she pressed her hand against her ribs. She smiled at Zinhle when Zinhle came home that evening. A full, warm smile. "You look wonderful, Zinhle," she said. "I am so happy for you." Zinhle smiled back, grateful, open, ready to finally be sisters in the full way that she had always hoped they would be. She did not see the thing behind Naledi's eyes. She had spent her whole life learning to believe the best of her sister. She was not prepared to stop now. Over the next 2 days, Naledi was perfect. She praised Zinhle in front of neighbors. She helped her choose cloth for a new wrapper. She braided her hair one evening and talked softly about nothing in particular. And Zinhle sat on the floor between her sister's knees and felt for the first time in her life that she was loved the way she had always wanted to be loved. She even laughed, really laughed, the kind of laugh that comes up from somewhere unguarded when Naledi made a small joke about the chief's son's horse. She did not know that Naledi had been awake the previous 2 nights, lying in the dark with her eyes open, building something in her mind that she could not let go of. She did not know that what felt like warmth was actually a decision being made, that every kind word was a piece of a plan, that the sister she was finally letting herself trust was already gone from the inside, replaced by something hollow and cold and determined. On the 3rd evening, Naledi came to her. "Let us go to the river together," she said. Her voice was soft. "Just us, to celebrate you. I want to do something nice for my sister." She held up a small woven bag, dried fruit, a piece of sugarcane. "We can sit by the water and talk. It has been a long time since we just talked." Zinhle felt warmth bloom in her chest so quickly it almost brought tears to her eyes. They walked to the river as the sun began to lower, the sky behind the hills going orange and then deep pink, the red soil of the path turning the color of old blood in the fading light. They sat at the bank for a while, eating the fruit, listening to the current. Naledi was quiet in a new way, not cold, but distant, like someone who had already arrived somewhere else in their mind.
Zinhle noticed it but said nothing. She thought perhaps Naledi was simply adjusting. She thought, be patient. She thought, this is how healing starts. Then Naledi stood up. Do you not wonder, she said slowly, still looking at the water, why it was you? Why the old woman chose you and not me? Zinhle looked up at her. I did not seek it, Naledi. No, but you have it. Something shifted in the air between them, a heaviness that was not the river and not the coming night, but something else entirely. Zinhle started to rise from the bank. She opened her mouth to say something, what she would never know, and in that precise moment, Naledi moved, quick, decisive, both hands. The push was not hesitant. It was the push of someone who had rehearsed it in the dark for 2 nights. Zinhle hit the water with a sound that silenced everything. The current, which was low but quick, took her faster.
Her hands broke the surface once, reaching forward, reaching up, and then the river pulled her under and she was gone. Naledi stood at the bank with her hand still out in front of her, her chest heaving, the water folding smooth and quiet over the place where her sister had been. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned around and walked home. The village found Zinhle at dawn. For 3 days, Naledi played grief. She wailed at the funeral preparation. She clutched the older women who came to comfort her. She pressed her face into her hands and made sounds that every person in Tshilapfene mistook for devastation. But Sonto had seen Naledi return from the river alone that evening, and one of the head boys had heard shouting near the bank before the sun went down. Small things, loose threads. Then Gogo Makadzi came out of the forest. She came on the 4th morning, walking slowly up the main path of the village with a staff carved from a dark branch, her blue cloth wrapped twice around her shoulders, her white hair catching the early light. The village went quiet when it saw her. She stopped in the center of the path where the 2 roads crossed near the chief's tree, and she spoke in a voice that carried despite its quietness. I gave that girl a gift, she said, a gift made of kindness, given to someone who gave kindness freely without being asked. What lives in such a gift cannot be taken by force. It cannot be drowned, but the one who tried to drown it, that one I know. She looked directly at Naledi. Naledi stood completely still. Her face did not move. She had practiced this moment too, staying calm, staying grieving, staying with the sister who had lost everything. But the village was looking at her now with different eyes. Sonto stepped forward. The head boy spoke. The loose threads pulled tight. By midday, Naledi stood alone. Not in the way she had once stood apart from the crowd, chosen, elevated, admired from a distance. She stood alone the way a person stands when everything around them has simply stepped back and left them in the open. The women who had praised her beauty did not meet her eyes. The men who had competed for her attention turned away. The chief's son, who had once sent his mother to inquire about her, passed her on the path without looking up. The crowd that had once gathered around her now gathered around her crime. She was not arrested. There was no court in Tshilapfene with walls and locks and a date. The punishment the village gave her was older than that. It was silence, closed doors, averted eyes. She walked through her own village home like a ghost that nobody wanted to acknowledge, beautiful and untouched and utterly alone. And every face that turned away from her said the same thing. We see you now. We see what you are. Zinhle's grave sat beneath an old baobab tree at the edge of the village, and the women planted wildflowers there that came back every season without tending. Children were brought to it and told the story, the whole story, from the spring to the calabash to the river. They were told about a girl who helped an old woman without being asked, who carried firewood when she was tired, who cried quietly rather than cruelly, who trusted her sister to the very end. They were told what she had become and how briefly she had been allowed to shine and why that mattered more than how long. And they were told about the other sister, not as a monster, but as a warning, as a mirror that every person must look into at least once and be honest about what they see.
The story did not say Naledi was born evil. It said she was given a gift, the gift of beauty, and she held it so tightly and valued it so completely that when it moved, even slightly, even to her own sister, she could not survive the loss of it. That the fire of jealousy does not light anything new, it only burns. Gogo Makadzi was never seen in the village again after that morning. Some people said she went back into the forest and dissolved into it, the way smoke dissolves into the sky. Others said she was still there, past the second hill, past the third, sitting on her low stone, waiting for whoever came down the path, tired and kind and carrying something heavy.